some more people. No, very quickly here. Now, to be clear, I know if I said gravel pits, I'd get attention, then I could backtrack. So to be clear, what we're not going to talk about, we're not going to be very focused in this particular group on SB 75, on what passed last year. That's a separate discussion that's going on. What we do want to talk about is are there things that we can do if you have a city that has gravel pits that we can look at that perhaps can help mitigate some of those impacts that may circle back to some of the discussions around SB 75. But we have a lot of your contact info, but if you're interested in talking about gravel pits and what we can do going forward there, again, my email, jlee, jlee@ulct.org. And then the last one I want to make you aware of, if you were at our annual conference, Alan Fuller from the state over the IT with the state DTS came and talked about artificial intelligence. Now there, and once again, a few people's heads poked up. These are exciting topics. Wait till we talk about climate anchors in just 1 second here. But Alan Fuller gave a presentation around AI, and there are some groups associated with the UEOC and some other people at the state looking at what policy should be around artificial intelligence and the different applications and uses at the government level. So what we would like to do is start putting together a working group to talk about AI, to review perhaps some of the state policies, to look at what might be some policies that we could promulgate for cities and towns before something gets foisted upon us from on high. So if you're interested in talking about artificial intelligence, AI, or if you want AI to join the meeting on your behalf, again, feel free to shoot me an email, jlee, @ulct.org, and we'll loop you into those discussions. Carson, how are we looking on the tech side over there?
Almost there.
Almost there?
Yep.
I can tell a joke for a minute, but Carson's next, so. Unless you want to jump up and we can start talking about what's in the housing realm.
Carson, do you want me to go?
Yep. Should I share the screen, Carson, PowerPoint on it? Give me a minute on that. Okay.
I'll just go up there and do that.
We'll hold off on that one. You want to do that? Okay. Yeah, take it away.
Perfect. Welcome everybody to LPC. As Carson's working through technical pieces, we appreciate everybody who is online with us. Looks like we have over 75 online, which is terrific. And then everybody in the room, thank you for being here as well. I'm going to quickly walk through the calendar. Justin, did you talk through the timing of Charlie, UEOC, and Mike? Great. I'm going to walk through that while Carson finishes getting this piece ready and just explain what we hope to accomplish over the next 75 or so minutes. This morning, the League Board of Directors met and we did a deep dive into several topics. We're going to be hitting other topics now during LPC, but all of these are topics that are in the UEOC and Commission on Housing Affordability policy realm, because the calendar is upon us and the clock is ticking. So today is September 25th. In a couple of days, the next UEOC growth and transportation meeting will occur. Mayor Ramsey and I represent the league on that subcommittee. So we're going to be asking for feedback from LPC members online and in person about a couple of the proposals that we'll be voting on later this week. Second, when I say voting on, there's not actually an official vote in that meeting, but we'll be talking through what recommendations to bring to the full UEOC. Meanwhile, on October 10th and 11th is the next legislative interim meetings, and the league officers with league senior staff will be meeting with governor's office as well as House leadership. We're meeting with Senate leadership this week to talk through most of these policy concepts. Then on Friday, October 13th, the Commission on Housing Affordability will meet for their last scheduled meeting to talk through several different policy proposals. And then this group will meet again on October 16th. So LPC is October 16th. So I know it's a quick turnaround in between LPC meetings, but we schedule it this way to make sure we can get feedback from you in anticipation of these CHA and UEOC meetings. And then the final scheduled UEOC meeting is Wednesday, October 18th. So you as LPC will meet 2 days before that final UEOC meeting, and I expect a lot to come into place over the next 3 weeks before then. Okay, with that as background, for those of you who walked in today, hopefully you picked up a copy of this document. This document was actually distributed at the Legislative Growth Policy Summit last week. Legislators all received it, and it's an excellent illustration of the different bills that have passed in recent years addressing growth, from economic development to land use, to transportation, to water. And it illustrates, I think, what we've been saying for the last few months, just the sheer number of bills that have passed the last couple of years that are trying to address growth, and these bills really need time to blossom. We have been pushing that message. I think this handout will help in that space. Additionally, there was another handout that is the PowerPoint that we'll be going through here momentarily. For those online, we'll be sharing the screen here shortly. So we'll walk through it so you can see it, and then we'll circulate it to LPC members afterward. But it walks through what the perceived problems are or the desired objectives, then what different proposals are from various stakeholders, lead concerns with some of those, if any, because there are some that we are concerned about, and then potential alternatives, if any, to try to solve those same problems. We're looking at everything through that underlying lens, so we've been saying all summer, which has been, does it result in more home ownership? Does it result in more actual affordability for the owner or renter? Does it result in sustainable infrastructure? And does it result in more quality of life for residents? So, the last handout, a couple quick slides on modular housing. This was one of the topics that the board did a deep dive on this morning that we'll give a quick update on. Carson, are we ready to proceed with the PowerPoint? Other than the fact that everything went black? Correct. Okay. In that case, now that I've laid out the time frame, we've already done that. Let's give a quick update on research while you're up here. Carson is part of our strategic response has been what is actually happening on the ground in city halls. We plan for housing, we don't build housing, but what have cities been planning for? Last year, our data set really helped change the narrative of the capital because we were able to show how many housing units have been entitled, but for which building permits have not been pulled, on top of a record number of building permits that have been pulled. Well, in light of the economic circumstances we're facing right now, permit numbers have gone to the basement. They've plummeted. And not our fault. That's an economic situation right now. Carson, want to give a quick update on where we're at with our land use research?
Yeah, thank you, Ken, and thank you everybody for your patience while I was trying to get all the pieces to work here. So this survey, we announced it a few times at LPC. We've distributed it through the Utah City Managers Association, and we've received 51 partial or complete responses to this point. So I want to give a huge shout out to these cities for filling out the survey. I know it takes time. I know it's inconvenient. I know these aren't always the same. The boxes we're asking for aren't always the same boxes that you're measuring, but we really, really appreciate it. If your city is not up here, we're still kind of cleaning up and finalizing some responses. So if your city's not on here, please find me. I'll get you the link. If you can get it filled out by the end of the week, we can still get you working through the system. So again, huge thank you to everybody. And we'll be distributing this PowerPoint at some point, so you can see, or there's a Google spreadsheet on the survey link. Yeah, we'll be working on this report coming soon. One of the things that we did commit to is being able to provide both the city managers and all the cities who filled out the survey kind of a preliminary response so they could see what all the results look like in aggregate, provide some feedback on how the final survey looks. So we'll be doing that very soon. Our goal is to have a final survey product ready by no later than, probably quite earlier, but by no later than the Utah City Managers Association conference. So we'll be able to provide everybody there with copies of it so they can use it. And then we'll be providing you all with copies as LPC members so you can have a good sense of the highlights of the data. We think this will be really helpful in telling our story and being able to demonstrate that you're planning for growth in a comprehensive way. I'll also add that we'll be launching our public safety, retirement, and recruitment survey pretty soon. This is the third year of this survey. It's been in partnership with the Chiefs of Police Association and Representative Quinn to try to understand what strategies are effective. Last year we had Utah Foundation run the analysis and field the survey. This year we'll just be managing that all in-house. It'll be more similar to the survey from year one than last year. So we're hoping to have some good findings for that. We'll be launching it pretty soon. The survey is almost complete. We just need to get the final sign off from everybody. That will be distributed directly through the Chiefs of Police Association, the Sheriff's Association, and our law enforcement partners, so you probably won't actually see it at any point unless you're also a public safety officer. We'll share results today. Lastly, I wanted to mention that we're working on coordinating more with other state leagues. I was in Washington DC with Mayor Shepherd. I don't see him here this last week. Oh, there you are, right in the back. We were both in DC last week, the National League of Cities and the American Planning Association Housing Accelerator. There were several other state leagues there, so we were coordinating with them on planning issues. Many of them are seeing the same possible legislation that we are in Utah. Likewise, we've been coordinating Zoom calls in person whenever we can with other state leagues who are experiencing the same thing. So we're trying to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. A lot of these bills are popping up similar fashion in different states. So we're trying to make sure that when California sees a bill that we've already seen, that we can coordinate with them, help them understand what we did that was effective or ineffective. Likewise, when another state experiences a bill that we think will be, or we expect to anticipate this coming session, we'll be able to work with them and understand what strategies they used, what data they collected, and how it played out. So again, we think this coordination with other states will be really effective as we try to build this partnership going forward. And we're all seeing the same issues, we're all seeing the same solutions from the private sector. So trying to make sure we're all collectively getting to defining outcomes. New issues working groups, Justin already hit some of these. I just wanted to mention the climbing anchor one. Patricia Wise from Laverton City reached out to us. There's currently a statutory provision that allows or extends, or maybe clarifies, I'm not sure the area term is, not being an attorney, but provides extra protection for local governments, cities and counties to provide recreation that might be considered dangerous. So there's some specific examples that the statute provides extra protections for. Those include mountain biking trails, I think paragliding, some of the more dangerous activities. Laverton's been interested in trying to expand their climbing access around that area for tourism opportunities, but their county attorney is not comfortable with going forward until they have this provision added that climbing is included in those lists of activities. I don't expect it to be controversial, but Laverton asked us to coordinate with other cities and try to see if this is an issue that you're experiencing. If it is, please just come and find me afterwards and I'll plug you into the conversation. Are there any questions about it? That was kind of a quick overview of a lot of research, but we've got a lot to talk through today. Great.
Perfect, thank you, Carson. Okay, let's jump into this. This is what I relayed to you a moment ago, but now if you want to take a picture of it, you can. These are the key dates. We are on the 25th. And this is the last time this group will meet before the next Commission on Housing Affordability, which is why we'll be asking some key questions in this meeting. We'll be using Slido to get feedback. We also welcome comments aloud. So if you've got comments online, put them in the chat room and staff will read them out loud. If you're in the room and you have questions or comments, please raise your hand. We'll call on you. So this is to quickly frame it. What we've heard from state leaders, how do we collectively produce more starter homes? The topic or the term du jour has been zoning reform. We've been seeing that term used more and more around the country. We've also heard it here locally, whether it's through Salt Lake County or Vision Utah or in the Commission on Housing Affordability. We've addressed in the land use process space the last couple of years ways to increase the overall efficiency of land use processes to facilitate more housing units. The second key piece is infrastructure costs. We're going to be asking a couple of questions here today because there's been some really positive collaborative discussion here about how the state and local governments can partner on infrastructure costs. And then of course that key message of Leadville that we've worked on the last couple of years to actually work before swinging for the fences with another huge policy shift. How many of you have had conversations with your legislators about number 3 there, letting enacted bills work? Okay, so about half the room's hands went up online. You don't need to raise your hand, but just make sure that as you're setting up your pre-session meetings with legislators, that's the key theme of how let enacted bills work, which of course, how they work will look different depending on your community. Cities don't control land, labor, materials, inflation, interest rates. We don't build housing, but we do plan for housing. which is what we've been doing over the last little bit. The past bills, as well as the data, shows that we've done a pretty darn good job, especially compared to the rest of the country. And then we'll talk about modular housing here momentarily, because that's an area where we do think we can get yes. This is a statement, I'm not going to read word for word, but that the UBOC endorsed at their last meeting, which does talk about giving recently enacted state policies time to breathe. It also says, in addition to giving the adequate time for implementation, that it's still the prerogative of legislation to propose additional modifications. So the good news is there was at least the acknowledgement. The incomplete news is where things go from here. So for example, just in the last few weeks, this is a list of the different concepts that have arisen from legislators or other stakeholders, ranging from state mandates around zoning, or better put, state preemptions around zoning, to partnerships on infrastructure funding and other things. This morning, we actually went through these 11 with the lead board, asked them to prioritize the ones that were most concerning and the ones that they were most comfortable with. So they've given us that general direction. So as recognizing none of these are in bill form yet, we can't really vote on them as an LPC yet. But we wanted to at least get the feedback from the board, what's most concerning and what's least concerning, so we can continue to relay that information back in our negotiations. Now we're going to pivot then to the table that is in the handout that was in the back, or those of you online, you can see it now. Okay, perfect. The way the table is organized is the perceived problem, desired outcome is the first column. The second column is what different stakeholders have proposed to address that problem. The third column is a list of what our concerns are, and those concerns come from the feedback we collected from you for, in some cases forever, in other cases from the summer. And then the fourth column are potential ULCT counter proposals to try to address the underlying question that are still consistent with our 4 key principles. Does the proposal result in more home ownership? Does it result in units that are more affordable? Does it result in infrastructure that is sustainable over the long term? And does it result in more quality of life for residents? Okay. We are going to be using Slido to ask you some questions about several of the concepts that are going to be in these tables. So again, if you have clarifying questions, I'm going to put the Slido question up so you can see what the Slido question is. I'll explain it before you provide your input, and again, ask any clarifying questions that you have. This morning, the board had a brief but informative discussion about the parking piece, which is that 4th row. We also discussed different ways to ensure that small lots actually facilitate small housing units, as opposed to here's a small lot and then a large housing unit that's not affordable ultimately gets built on that. The first line of question we're going to ask you about is actually based in that 3rd row, and that is the judicial process piece. This is not a new issue. We've heard this issue for as long as I've been at the league. The judicial process is lengthy, so when there is a dispute, are there alternative ways to address that dispute, short of going to court in the traditional system? This is the genesis of the Property Rights Ombudsman's Office, which I think has been a good asset and has really helped facilitate resolving conflicts short of going to court. But as usual, there are the proposals that would allow for damages against cities or attorney's fees against cities. So you can see our counter arguments that we made, but what the dialogue over the last few days has actually spurred that maybe we need to look at an additional dispute resolution mechanism that could be a land use specialty court at the district court level. So in other words, if there's a dispute that goes to court right now, it would go to district court between a local government and a property owner. And one frustration that attorneys share on both sides of the ledger, both local government side and on developer side, is the lack of expertise that often exists at the district court level. So if there was a specialty court that focused on land use, that cases could be removed from the district court judge to the land use court judge, and that land use judge could still function as a district court judge, but have that area of expertise. Could that speed up the process and get more consistent land use decisions? So that's the quick, high level thought. This type of court does exist in other states. So this is the first Slido question. How do you feel about the proposal to create a specialty court at the district court level that would specialize in land use issues? So you can log on the Slido that way and chime in accordingly.
Hey, Kim, since we're redoing the courts anyway, is there any chance we could get this under a municipal court?
Okay, so the question from the back was the overlap with the examination of justice boards and whether it can be under the jurisdiction of the local government. So I'm gonna answer the first half of that. And the first half of that is because there's a lot of focus right now on the future of justice courts and the relationship between district courts, the timing might actually be right for this type of specialty court. The second piece of that, I think, would be unlikely, but at least you've got some conversations happening right now in the judicial space that might facilitate this piece of it. And the legislature just last year created a specialty court for certain types of business plans. So this could potentially be a natural extension to what they did last year.
Yeah, probably to have people.
Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. That's why, yeah, Roger, when it has to be a court of records, the thought here is this would be at the district court level. And a district court judge can essentially remove it to the land use specialty judge, but it would still function in the judicial procedure as a district court. Okay, we'll leave it open for another 10 seconds here, but looks like uncertain, so I'm going to take that as just a lot of questions about what it actually looked like. So that's not a no, but it's have questions and then but this is really helpful. This is really helpful because we've got some meetings with legislators in the next couple of weeks on this topic, so it's helpful to know where folks are at. Okay. Carson, do you want to do this question?
Yeah.
This is also on your table. This is on the second page. This relates to the use of the set aside that is required under state law for RDA or CRA dollars. Carson.
Thanks. So this is a existing requirement that certain redevelopment agencies and certain projects withhold a portion of their funds for affordable housing. This has historically been used for deeply affordable housing. There's some specific other allowances, but there's been a proposal in the Commission on Housing Affordability space, possibly expand the uses of it, recognizing that there are some communities who aren't collecting enough funds or just don't have enough, the projects aren't big enough to generate enough revenue to really make a dent in some of these deeply affordable projects. So, and there's others where you might have an area where it just looks within the community. So the thought would be, well, rather than just using, like, sitting on these funds without a good place to put them, just open it up a little bit more so you have more flexibility. There would still be some tie to affordability, but it would likely be a higher income threshold, probably 100% or maybe a little bit higher. But the intent being trying to get to this product that the market can almost deliver, but interest rates may be really difficult. And municipalities might be able to use a small amount of resources to make a big dent here. This hasn't been discussed more broadly. This is kind of a newer concept in this space, but yeah, I wanted to throw this out there. So it looks like we have the majority with very comfortable, and then a second smaller amount with somewhat comfortable. All right, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Carson. Carson, let's move the slide results. I go back a few slides, or are those all recorded now?
You can go back.
Okay. Great. We skipped the slide of questions on page 2 that were down at the judicial process and RDA. Just wanted to get your thoughts moving here and get you engaged that way. I want to come back to the top though of page 2, and that's the modular housing piece. This is the one piece within the Commission on Housing Affordability of the different proposals that have come up from the development side, where we felt like there is a path to yes in a way that will facilitate more housing affordability and at least a reduce in cost of housing that hopefully then results in a reduction of price. We had a good deep dive discussion with the board this morning on this topic. Jared Tinney, our legal director, is going to just give you an update on that conversation and just ask for general feedback. Jared, I'll turn it over to you to give a quick update on modular, and those who are in the room. There was a quick handout so you can see what he's going to be following through. Carson, are these in the PowerPoint that we're sharing or not? the two modular plans.
I think those were printed out, but we'll drop a link.
Yeah, we'll drop a link to it, perfect, sure.
Many of you have modular already coming into your city. Or have seen it in other cities. And so, like Cam said, we believe that this is one of the proposals that we may be able to agree on, get to a yes. The as we met with the board today, general consensus from the board was positive and moving forward with some sort of policy in relation to modular housing. Obviously, there are concerns when you get down into the details of what that looks like, and so we, as we work with the different modular groups that we're working with, we'll plan on looking at several different things, different concerns that were brought up in the board meeting. Specifically about liability of municipal building inspectors and what that looks like if they can't see the inside and products are shipped already closed up and coming into the city. As well as having inspections being done by third-party inspectors hired by manufacturing facilities. So there are a couple concerns, but that we're working through. If you are interested in participating in modular housing group discussions, please get a hold of me and I can loop you in. So. Are there any questions? There are no questions, Cam.
Thank you for Jared for that. Thank you to the board this morning for all the time. This is a big one. This is a big one, and you'll see in the handout in the back. The majority of states, including Utah, have some sort of regulatory scheme around modular. It varies depending on where you are. And we anticipate, based on the discussions we've had with different economic development professionals in the state, we anticipate there's going to be a big push to try to recruit manufacturers who will come in and actually build factories to facilitate modular housing in Utah. So we think once the regulatory scheme is in place, you're going to see more and more modular housing come to the state. And based on what we've been told by the development community, that could have a significant impact to decrease the cost of housing production. That's still up the air, and then of course there's the question of decrease the cost. Does that also reduce the price? But anyway, this one's a big deal. So that's why we want to make sure we get it right, recognizing that there are potential consequences down the road on inspection authority, plan review authority, certificate of occupancy, and the like. So that's why I'm giving you one last chance. If anybody has any questions you want to bring up to Jared now, or you can follow up with them later. But this is what we're working to try to get to consensus on the next couple of weeks.
Just one follow-up, as far as the PowerPoint presentation here, you'll see what the process looks like according to our negotiations and our conversations, starting with licensing of third-party inspectors, all the way down to each modular being inspected before it's being assembled on site. So if you've got any questions as far as that process is concerned, or how to read this map, we as a state, I just should say, we as a state and the proposals that have been going around, we are going to be focusing on having and remaining with the local plan review, but then having third-party inspectors, so long as they're licensed and they are qualified to do that. So.
Hey, Cam, and I talked to Jared about this earlier. I guess my concern on this is if these modular products are built in Utah, we're totally good. We support modular construction, and all of the experience that we've had has been with product that's being created here in Utah. The question or the concern that I would have is if there's no guardrails in place and modular housing is being shipped in from out of the state, are we exporting jobs for potentially cheaper rates? We're losing sales tax, we're losing jobs, we're losing all kinds of other things that need to be considered. So I would say we are very supportive of modular housing. I do think that whatever legislation we're putting in place has guardrails on it so that we don't lose economic value of those jobs being here in Utah and other things. So just that would be our caveat from the past times we've discussed this.
So in my district,
Oh, 1 second, so we're getting white for people online. I should also note that there should have been a question mark in this first row, number 3, there should have been a question mark. I don't know, it's not a statement, it's a question. Sorry about that. Carson, can we fix that before we send out the number 3 on the first row? Should be a question mark at the end of that. That's
so in my district too, in Murray, we have some of these modulars on Winchester and Southwest. And I'm assuming they're modular, but they don't own the property, they just own the home. Is that what we're looking at? Is that they don't own the property, but they own the home? So when they're ready to sell and they have their equity, they can move into a home where they own the land. And that's what, is that still going to be part of the procedure or not?
That would be, I think, more so on a mobile home. With modular, what we're talking about with modular is we are talking about modules of homes. In other words, a full floor coming in and being craned up, lifted up into place. And it would be just as the same process as far as buying a home for any other resident. You buy a home, your builder, you say, okay, this is the modular that I'm looking at, that I want. And they bring in modular or module by module, piece by piece to connect it together on site. Is that
And that's
I
what
don't-
these are.
okay?
They put A and B together and they have a home.
Okay, so
And they're not trailer. They're not trailers.
right,
It's not
right.
a trailer. So I'm just asking, do they own the piece of property with this new?
They would own the piece of property.
Okay.
Yeah, they would own the piece of property and the home.
And the home, okay.
Unless someone else has unless someone is renting and owns the property and the home and is renting to them, that would be, but yes, they would. As a property owner, you would own the home, you would own the land, and this is your house.
I think what you're talking about, there are a number of mobile home parks that have switched. So when they bring a home in, they're a 2-piece factory built and they put them together. That's what you're talking about. And there are a lot of them are doing that now. I don't think in fact, that's the only kind that most of them put a new one in. What these guys are talking about is what they're talking about doing in Draper, which is they want to do a 4-story apartment complex, all modular. So they'll bring these units in, truck them, I guess, or bring them by the train car, I don't know which, but, and then crane them together, put them together like Legos, I guess. Right, I can relate to Legos. The factory that,
I
of
think
the
it
one,
might be a little bit more complicated, but I think
probably, but I don't know. There's a factory in Idaho that's building the particular one that Ivory wants to do in our city. And I was gonna tell Cam, I'll say it now, they've offered us, they've offered me and some of our folks in our city to go up to the factory and look at it. I'd be happy to set up a group that we all want to go look at it to see what it is, but I think these are gonna come out of a different state. There'll probably be some here, but the ones they're talking about doing right now in my city are coming out of Idaho.
yeah, and like Cam said, I think that certainly in the discussions that we've had, and kind of to address Mark's concern as well, the discussion has been to incentivize or to talk about how we can get manufacturing facilities into Utah. So that's not happening outside of Utah, but that's coming straight from Utah, that the manufacturing facility is here. And you've got less transportation time, and those that work at the manufacturing facility. I see that.
I have a question about plan review. You mentioned that being done locally. Would that need to be done locally? Because that's a drawing, a plan, or perhaps the local part would be because where it is would make a difference on the way it's drawn. I had bought a set of plans one time, but I built a house too. And it was, you would tell them what area you are in, and then you could select plans that fit in that location. So that you would get one that handles, like the terrain that your house is built in. How would this work in something like that?
TBD, to be determined as far as how the builders and developers propose certain, I know that it's been talked about as far as here is your plan. You can choose from this plan, this plan, and this plan. And it's up to you what you want, and then it's kind of manufactured on the same plan, the same home, different colors. But I think that's still down the road that we're still looking at. But certainly on the plan review side of things, the city municipal building official would be looking at those plans. Make sure that, because Florida is obviously different than Utah when it comes to snow and ground and a lot of other things. So that is the proposal moving forward right now, is kind of what we're looking at. And so that's where the plan review starts, and we're still having a discussion.
Tammy Tran, Feesville. I just was wondering, do we have the lenders on board for financing options? It seems like, oh yeah, that'd be a great idea, but I know modular housing is a little bit troublesome when it comes to financing.
In my discussions, that has not been discussed. So good question, and I can follow up with you on that as well.
Then we've got some questions here online. Let's see here. So there are questions, I'll come back to the questions about the special recording seconds. There are a few questions there that I can address. I just want to leave this topic. You want to hit which one?
Yeah.
Don Shelton's comment, and then Owen Spencer, Beaver. There you go. Start with Don, and then there's Owen Spencer.
Okay. Okay, so the first comment or question was my experience with Don Shelton. My experience with modular housing is that there is a modest reduction in cost, not significant. Will it actually reduce price of housing? I think what when Cam was up here, that is one of the concerns and one of the things that we will be voicing and making sure the devil's in the details, and how we ensure that the modular, moving forward with modular, will translate into affordable housing. So that's a discussion that we're continuing to have. Further questions here.
Owen Spencer.
Okay. I would think the foundations, connections to the foundations would need to be inspected along with water, sewer, and electrical connections. So the water, sewer, and electrical connections, if you're talking about what it looks like inside the wall, those the construction is closed construction for electrical, for plumbing, for sewer, water. Those would be closed up before they come into your city. After they come into your city, that's when the foundations would be inspected. That's when the actual connections between the ground, water, and the and other infrastructure would be connected and inspected by your city. So that is how that would take place. As far as inspections go,
Gary,
yes,
so there's a difference between the panelized construction.
Right.
Where they have all those panels, and then the modular. A lot of times, if you're shipping it a long ways, you're probably panelized and not a true modular. And there you can still see where they're having to do the connections. If it's modular, you'll see where they have to connect to wherever the next modular is, so there are some connections you can still see.
and can they hear that online?
I'm not sure, you might want to repeat.
Okay, so what was said is that a lot of those that are shipped in from other states, are by panel. And when it's by panel, for example, a wall that is already done, but there is an open connection to where it isn't fully closed up. There are also those obviously that are module form that would be all closed up. But those, comment was made that those that are out of state typically are still open if it's a panel coming in. Okay, I think that's it. And did I see another hand? No, okay.
Perfect. This issue is gonna be front and center at the CHA meeting on Friday, October 13th. So between now and then, based on the feedback from the board this morning, as well as the comments we've heard here, we're gonna be continuing to build out that proposal. So if you have last call over the next week or two, if you have additional thoughts or want to help Jared as we're working through this concept, let us know. Before we leave modular entirely, Councilor Carter, I want to come back to the question you asked. Because there may be another thing at play with that particular proposal or that particular development. That's the shared equity model. And this is starting to pick up some momentum around the state where a nonprofit will own the underlying land, whether it's a community land trust or another entity. The nonprofit owns the land, or the nonprofit will share the equity with the first-time home buyer. And then when the first-time home buyer moves out, the nonprofit still retains it and sells it back to a new first-time home buyer. So the legislature last year, for the first time, funded some of the shared equity model. We supported that. And we're seeing it in a couple of different settings around the states. I don't know if that's your project per se, but we know that there have been some community land trusts around the state. There's one in Moab, there's one in Park City, there's one in Utah County. There's one under consideration in Salt Lake City. There's not one there is under consideration in Salt Lake City. Okay, not the head nod. Norm, is there one in Seneca? Is that model working? So a question from Norm in Seneca, when is that model working? And I want to put Park City and Moab and others on the hot seat to say, is it working or not? But my hunch is it depends on location, it depends on who the investor is, it depends on who the nonprofit is. Okay, Park City, give me a thumbs up, because we've heard different stories around the country and locally, but there's a lot of potential for it. And in fact, former Representative Steve Waldrop is involved in trying to build out a shared equity model and looking for state dollars to help partner on it. But and his model would be focused on first-time home buyers, multi-family condominium projects. Okay. All right. I was going to address the questions that came up in the chat. Carson or Liam, can you just quickly remind me what the questions were in the chat there?
Yes, on the ombudsman piece, right?
Yeah, the ombudsman.
Yeah, okay, let's see. Oh, there's just some question about expanding the ombudsman's role, and then Sean said that they talked about that. But the current problem just won't be fixed there at the ombudsman piece and has to move on.
Now, we've had discussions, preliminary discussions with the ombudsman's office about this concept, and they are intrigued by the concept, and they think that it could actually make their role even more valuable, because now a district court judge will have the level of expertise to be able to rely more on that ombudsman decision, or not decision, but the ombudsman counsel advisory opinion. So anything else, Liam, in that space? Okay, perfect. Okay, so next, moving in the table. In hindsight, I sort of put numbers on the pages, but that's cool. It's one that starts with CHOP funding. We're not asking for a position on CHOP funding at this point. We're just making you aware that at the CHOP meeting, these were the dollar amounts going forward from Wayne Niederhauser's office for deeply affordable housing or to help support the homelessness efforts. The board will be considering these in more detail in a few weeks. But I think it's important, as we're having a holistic conversation on housing, to know that last year the legislature did put their money where their mouth was, and they invested more money in deeply affordable housing than any year prior to that. They also received more than 3 times the applications from nonprofit developers and others seeking these dollars. So it was a historic amount, and the demand was more than 3 times what was available. So Wayne Niederhauser's asks are broken down this way, but we also anticipate this is still an incomplete list. We think there'll be more asks at the next CHOM meeting around state resources to help on housing. One policy point that we've heard has been around local land use policy and local land use ordinances and zoning around deeply affordable housing. We're still trying to better understand that point. If cities are saying no to deeply affordable housing projects that are coming to communities, or developers are just not asking cities, they're not proactively bringing them to cities, whether that's through a zone change or an application. So we're trying to gather more information about that piece. That second row is around funding to help housing and community development. This is for purposes of monitoring from housing plan reporting, compliance, and the like. We've started receiving the preliminary results of compliance and non-compliance. Again, it's still incomplete because they're still going through the process. The preliminary list that we saw last week had some cities that were not in compliance, and they've been notified, and now they have the opportunity to cure. So we're not going to announce a number yet until the process goes a little bit further. And keep in mind, last year we were able to create an appeals process so that a city has that opportunity to appeal that finding of non-compliance. The third row is around public safety mitigation. This is now moving to homelessness. And one key piece here is in the governor's press conference last week. The topic he talked about the most was housing. He referenced the league twice by name, but he referenced mayors and council members more than 10 times during the course of that press conference around the need to work with mayors and council members to facilitate more housing. Interestingly, the first couple of stories that came out of that press conference were focused around his comments on Tim Ballard and a vlogger who I'd never heard of until his press conference, and some other things there. But just know that he talked about housing and local government and housing and local government most of any topic, and the second most was homelessness. So be aware that these funding requests will likely have things added to them over the next couple of weeks. And then he kept saying, tune in to the UEOC on October 18th, because we're going to talk about a lot of these proposals. But he didn't go into details about what they were. Now, the good news is he struck a very collaborative tone and referenced multiple times that cities have done a great job planning for housing, that we were #1 in the country for new housing starts in 2022. We knew there were a lot of entitled units. He referenced station area plans. So that was a positive. The less positive is he made comments about how cities were gaming some of the new bills, and that there was still a role for the state to step in if necessary in different spaces. So just know that that was the tenor. Overall, it was positive. We'll be meeting with his senior staff here in the next few days. That does set up this the homelessness piece. We're seeking ongoing money. We've got one-time money in that fund. The last year, we're seeking ongoing money in that fund. But then this aligned state infrastructure fund with good planning, because the governor referenced this in his press conference. He said it during our convention a few weeks ago, that density without infrastructure results in a reduced quality of life. Density with infrastructure, or infrastructure preceding the density, maximizes quality of life. So I should move this so you can actually see what I'm talking about. whatever. That'll work. That'll work, it's now just on the bottom two lines. Go ahead. Even better, okay, even better. So, I'm on line number 4, UEOC growth, aligned state infrastructure funding with good local planning. We're gonna ask a Slido question about this one, because we're gonna be considering this in our UEOC subgroup in 2 days. Some of these concepts actually came from league members that we have proactively put forward this summer. I'm gonna reference 2, 3, and 4, and then I'll come back to 1. Parking structure fund for infill. The concept here is if the state were to create a fund that could help facilitate parking structures, or could help pay for parking structures, so long as those parking structures facilitated infill redevelopment that included housing units, and those housing units were to be owner occupied or meet some sort of affordability threshold. So essentially, the state could bring in some gap financing to help facilitate that sort of mixed use redevelopment. Much of those mixed use redevelopments projects are what cities are planning for anyway, but financing a parking structure to make all the pieces come together is incredibly cost prohibitive. So that's item number 2. Item number 3 deals with more of your greenfield development and recognizing that for a lot of communities that are the rapid growth, high growth communities, you've got lots of entitled units, but it takes a while to actually get the utilities in the ground. And so can the state step in, particularly right now when interest rates are so high and financing is slow to a standstill on the private side, can the state through the state infrastructure bank facilitate the development of these utilities so long as the outcome is units that are affordable and units that are owner occupied? Last year, we were successful at modifying the state infrastructure bank to focus on greenfield redevelopment for this purpose. It just was not funded last year. The 4th one, honestly, this one just doesn't have enough meat on the bones yet, so I think this one is going to get discarded in the funneling process over the next few weeks. But it's a similar concept, state dollars to help facilitate playing fields and parks that are in areas that are seeing higher density housing developments. Now we come back up to number 1. This is the criteria in House Bill 462. This is the menu of moderate income housing plan items and the strategies that each city has to select. So the baseline for Cameron City that does not have transit is you have to select 3 menu items. For Jeff City that has transit, you have to select 4 menu items. So straight up to get percent in the front row. So Jeff City, the baseline is 4, Cameron City, the baseline is 3. What we inserted in House Bill 462 a couple years ago, and this LPC supported, was that you would get additional prioritization from UDOT in programming those dollars if you selected 2 additional menu items, so it'd be 5 or 6. So baseline 3 or 4, 5 or 6 extra credit, and you've got additional points in UDOT's prioritization process. They've just finished their rulemaking in that process to provide those additional points in the Transportation Commission prioritization process. So the thought here is that if we all collectively want more additional affordable homeownership, is there a menu item that most directly gets to that point that should be the centerpiece of the above and beyond? So it's not just any 2 items, it would be this particular menu item. You select this plus another one that gets you the additional prioritization. The last thing before we switch over to Slido here is the transit innovation grants. Again, this came from our members, but right now we're in the budget phase for the state where they need to start figuring out what can actually pass, what do they set aside for future years, and revenue projections are coming in much lower than previously anticipated. I'm not authorized to tell you the number, but just know that the budget numbers are lower than anticipated. So part of what they were looking from us was prioritize which ones would have the best bang for the buck and which ones would local governments embrace if we were to fund them in this upcoming legislative cycle. So on transit innovation grants, the concept here is that local governments could receive grants to fund shuttles, to expand transit service. So if you have a bus that's coming every 30 minutes, the transit innovation grant could increase that to every 15 minutes. And you have shuttles to connect a park and ride in Harriman to the daybreak, track station, a pass program to facilitate that if you have a ticket to the jazz basketball game, that jazz basketball game ticket would count as your tracks pass, your bus pass, and what they do at the University of Utah, or if you want to do. So, but it would be a locally driven piece where locals and state work together to increase transit ridership and build out those data points for future service expansion. So, with that being said, let me check. Okay, good, that's nothing there in the chat room. Okay, so which of these funds, if any, would your city likely utilize? The above and beyond prioritization, the transit innovation grants, where your city could receive a grant to expand transit service, park infrastructure fund for infill development, or state infrastructure bank support utility infrastructure and greenfield. Again, we've taken parks and the open space off for now because, again, based on the feedback we were getting, it just wasn't quite ready for prime time, where these ones have proceeded through the UEC process so far. And it's okay to say all that apply. So if we can go back to the governor's office and legislative leadership and say, there is significant interest in these, it would be worth the investment, that's a good message to deliver as well. So I'll give you a moment to give us the feedback here. And again, the thought with the greenfield development and the infill development is that it would result in those housing outcomes that we've said we wanted, more affordable home ownership and sustainable infrastructure. Yeah, we're over 60, which is where we were at for the other ones. So that's we'll close it in 10 seconds. And then Justin, I'll turn it over to you to talk through lids and to decide a question on lids, and I'll come back for transportation utility fee and to summarize the other trial items. Okay, going once, going twice. This is really helpful feedback though, so thank you everybody for filling that out. Oh, this gets to those funding requests we were saying that, this is the current status of how the pieces fit together for affordable housing. But stay tuned, more to come on this in the next few weeks. It's yeah, and then slide.
All right, talking about lids, or whatever the acronym ends up being this year. If you recall, it has been lids and lids and other things. But if you recall, the current proposal on lids and the one that's out there is that the property owners can create lids without any kind of city approval. That was what was on the table last year in legislative session. That's been some of the discussions coming this year as well. So obviously there's a concern on here, but we've obviously got some more concerns with that. One of the important things to remember with the lid proposal is that it has to be paid off at the time of the building permit. So unlike a PID where they can pay it off in the future, it gets paid off before anybody moves into that home. So there are a few proposals out there. Representative Dunnigan has been working with us or talking with us on this, and has thrown out a couple of proposals, and we want to get your feedback on that. Some of you who have been involved in the infrastructure group have seen these questions before, but we want to bring it to a larger group as we expect to talk to Representative Dunnigan in the next couple of weeks. So one of the ideas is lids would be created, they'd be different than PIDs, but the city could still be there as the gatekeeper. So they'd still be there to approve the creation of a lid. Again, similar to PIDs, but the payoff structure would be different. Another couple of things that we're going to ask you is whether or not how you would feel about the lid is still created without city approval, but if they wanted to make any kind of change to the mill levy, they would have to come back to the city to get approval on that. So still created, but there's sort of a secondary gatekeeper option there. So going back to Slido. So this again, this is the baseline proposal that you've seen before. How do you feel about the proposal to allow lids statewide without local government approval? Very concerned, very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, uncertain. somewhat concerned. No, it's not broken, it's just that slanted right now. I'm shocked on this one, frankly. Sometimes we just like to ask things just to make sure. I'm gonna give this one about 10 more seconds. Because I think we know where we're going on this one. All right, gonna jump to the next one. How do you feel about the proposal to allow lids statewide with local government approval? So they cannot be created unless you at the city or town level approve it. Again, differences between lids and PIDs. Well, one of the big differences is these get paid off at the time of building permit, kind of piecemeal, as the development goes along. Gonna give about 20 more seconds on this one.
That's a quick question on that.
Yep.
So what would be the reason for denial? Would they come back and say, just being a bit none of this, or would there be specific reasons that you really could deny?
So yeah, the question is, yeah, what would be the reasons you could deny this? And that's something that we have to talk through and look at. But right now it's similar to a PID. You don't have to approve a PID. It would be the same thing with the lid for whatever various reasons. You could have the proposal come to you and then say, no, we've looked at this, we don't feel like this is the right move for us. But you would have that gatekeeper government approval authority there. All right, we're about our just over 60 magic number here. So we're going to jump to our final one. How do you feel about the proposal to allow lids statewide with local government approval if there's any change to the mill levy? So the homeowner, the property owners, excuse me, can still create the lid. They don't have to get your government approval for that. But if they make any change to that mill levy, they do have to come back and ask for approval.
Was that after the first mill levy that they placed on it?
So yeah, they have the original mill levy, and that's pretty set in statute as to what they can do. They do have the sovereign power though, that they get to have taxing authority. So if they were to go and make any change to that mill levy after that original one, then they would have to come and get approval from the city.
Would that include extending the mill levy beyond the initial term?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but I think so, because that would be a change to, I think, what is in there. It's not set, nothing's set in stone here because this is just a proposal. So Mark, I think that's something we could take
That's
back.
how you game the system, is you just keep extending the existing mill levy. Alpine School District does it all the time.
So yeah, that's an interesting point. Can we leave this one up for about 10 more seconds? Yeah.
Well, another question is that, because our mill levy goes down, we don't increase taxes there, or just stay the same, because it doesn't. That's leading, that's raising the mill levy if it doesn't go down like.
If it doesn't go down like normal, that's a good question. I'll find out on that one too. But again, this proposal, so as we were talking to Representative Dunnigan, this is one of the ideas he threw out is, how do you feel about this? So we didn't flesh through every iteration of that, but that's a really good point. Okay, I think we've got what we need on that one. Any comments on mine, Liam?
Yes, I was just going to let you know, so Sean said need to address projects that aren't completed, and he said if local governments have to go through the truth and taxation process, why should developers be able to circumvent the process?
Amen.
Okay, any others? Okay, we'll jump to the next one though, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Justin. And that, to me, that was an incredibly helpful data point of distinguishing between the underlying policy and the lid proposal with the underlying political authority and the sovereign power piece. That it's not the policy, a good chunk of league members said if policy, as long as we're the gatekeeper, that policy could be really workable. It's the gatekeeper piece that's the critical component here. So that would be helpful. So we have a meeting with Representative Dunnigan in a couple days. Yeah, somebody's already voted, even though I haven't described it. That's a really good answer. Okay, next. This is the last row UEOC growth transportation utility fee. We've had a work group that has been providing us some good feedback. We had a really good meeting with Representative Karen Peterson a few days ago. And so before you keep answering the question, let me just add a couple quick things. Number one, that may include different stakeholders like Libertas, who was behind the lawsuit at Pleasant Grove, as well as the Taxpayers Association. The Taxpayers Association came back and said, we recognize that the league has some core principles around user fees and core principles around the transportation utility fee that the board adopted a few weeks ago. They said, maybe the way we can actually address it is preempt cities on the transportation utility fee, but instead authorize cities, which they thought they already allowed this, and they're right, that cities could instead do a citywide special service district. And that citywide special service district could impose a transportation specific property tax. Over the last couple of weeks, as we've talked to some of the folks in our work group, feedback has been, in that case, you're still not actually getting to the user fee component, because the special service district would not be imposing user fee, it would just be imposing the general property tax. Likewise, the legislature would be preempting our fee authority, which is problematic for reasons above and beyond the transportation utility fee. And from a good government perspective, now you would essentially be having the city creating a district that aligns with the city, having the city operate as a city and a special service district. So even as we talked to several special service district experts, they were concerned about that sort of precedent. So our plan going forward is to go back in the next meeting, which we'll be meeting with them again next week, and say no to the proposal on the special service district fees, and instead focus on kind of the dialogue to date around the framework on the user fee. So before I go to the user fee, any thoughts on the special service district concept that the Taxpayers Association brought forward? Or so it's reading. Here comes Angela.
You know, I'm just concerned with that special service district thing, runs an air of opacity and lack of transparency with respect to who's levying the tax. So, I mean, if we're gonna do it, let's have the city council do it.
Well, that's a perfect segue to what the dialogue to date has been. Again, major kudos to Representative Peterson. She's made it clear that her intent, she's a former city council member, but her intent is to provide a framework for how cities could potentially impose transportation utility fees, but also make sure that it's not easy to do. It's doable, but not easy. That's been our catchphrase in these conversations. So you can see the dialogue to date is consistent with the board principles thus far. You'd have to have a third-party study. You codify the term reasonable relationship. So whatever your ultimate fee is, has to have a quote-unquote reasonable relationship with service the city's providing. And that would be repaving roads or rebuilding sidewalks, whatever, however you define it through your study, that reasonable relationship, you would need that piece. User fee for everyone. You would need a public meeting to review the needs study and an additional public meeting where you approve the transportation utility fees. And what I reference here is the Provo model of annual review is something she was really intrigued by. Provo, the first city to do the transportation utility fee back in 2013, has an annual review where they look at all the other revenue streams that go to transportation. Those could be the county options of transportation, the motor fuel tax, anything else. And then that informs the discussion at the council level of whether to continue the fee, whether to increase it or decrease it. We still have some unanswered questions. Like, for example, Representative Peterson wants to know, or wants us in the next meeting to talk through, is there a trigger to when you have to redo your study, or a trigger of how much you can do at any time to increase the user fee? But as of now, you can see where the dialogue is at. Mark?
I'm sorry, did you say public meeting or public hearing?
MTG means meeting. Okay. HRG would have been here. Oh, fair point. So, but all jokes aside, we had that conversation on the meeting, the hearing fees. And where things are right now, Provo's been involved in these discussions, so I can correct me if I misremembered any of this. But you'd have a public meeting to review the study. So the third party entity does the study and shows, I'll use Provo since they have one in place, shows Provo, this is your gap, this is your needs analysis, and this is your reasonable relationship path forward. Okay. Provo would review that needs study in a public meeting. Could be a work session, could be a public, public meeting of the council, but it needs to be done publicly. Then when the time comes to approve the transportation utility fee, what we've been pushing for is just that it would be done in a public meeting. There still is a possibility as the negotiations go that would have to be in a standalone public hearing. Thus far, that's been part of the back and forth. So to be determined on the second piece, but right now the discussion is bending out the two pieces of two different public meetings.
What I'm concerned about.
Wait, Angela, so our good friends online can hear you. And I'm checking the chat room to see if they're.
Yeah, real quickly, what I'm concerned about is that a public hearing essentially is creating an obligation for an annual truth to taxation discussion on a fee that could have been set a year or 2 years before, whatever. So I'm comfortable with the public meeting. I don't want this to become an annual truth to taxation kind of an issue that we're subjecting our councils to. If they adopt the fee, if the study's good, if the revenues are coming in, there's no sense in opening closed wounds.
True, and you touch on an important point of negotiation right now. I want to give a shout out to the now newly retired Wayne Parker, who retired a week and a half ago now as CAO of Provo. So his third to last day on the job, he was at the Capitol, helping negotiate on this issue. Yeah, he walked Representative Peterson through the process for how cities currently adopt the fee schedule. And she knew that because she'd been on city council, but it was helpful for the other stakeholders to walk through that process. The other stakeholders would like to see more of a truth in taxation process around the transportation utility fee. So where we'll end up could be somewhere in between. Could be that it's just adopted as part of a normal fee schedule. It could be that they keep pushing that it has to look just like truth in taxation before user. That's still up in the air. We've been saying no to something that looks like truth in taxation, and we've been pushing just to treat it like any other fee. But the politics of that could get complicated as it goes forward. But that's why I want to do just a quick check-in on this. It looks like people are comfortable with where things are at right now. So that is excellent feedback as we return to that meeting. Okay. It's been the lightning round today. We still have a few more to go, so hang with us here. Any final thoughts on transportation utility fee or anything we've done to date before we pivot to the land use task force items? Okay. All right, next in your table. And has this been helpful? Big show of hands, has this been helpful to you guys? Yes, okay, perfect. That's good to know after putting it all together, that it's helpful. We'll keep trying to do it. Okay. Subdivision infrastructure phase in, you can basically see everything here in the child land use task force space. And you'll also see more TBDs on this page than you saw before. That's because those other proposals are a little more fleshed out. But these are also pretty time sensitive because the land use task force last scheduled meetings in early November, and we met last week, and these were the concepts we were discussing. So we wanted to bring them back to the larger LPC, make sure you were aware of what's being discussed there, so that you can follow up with us if you have any feedback. So I'll just quickly hit these. There's concern that some local governments have misused the countervailing compelling reason for when cities do a moratorium on development through land use ordinance. Still TBD on where that goes, if anywhere. Internal ADUs and impact on infrastructure. This has come to a head in the city of Lehigh, but there have been several legislators who've asked us about this, and you have some on the development side who want to push for a clarification of when cities can and cannot deny IADUs. Our alternative has been TBD because we were waiting on a data presentation from Lehigh City that they gave to some key stakeholders a few days ago that we attended. So that, again, that question is still up in the air, but just know that one's out there. Excessive increases in disproportionate rental fees for rental units. I just realized I was on the wrong page here than I am here. So let's come back to the page on my screen. Subdivision infrastructure phasing. Clarified separate and complete land use application can proceed so long as not dependent on incomplete infrastructure. The fact pattern that's been presented here is basically you've got project A, project B. if they're unrelated to each other, and there have been problems with project A. There have been examples of where local governments have held up project B, even though project B has been a complete application, and they're independent of each other. So the request is meant to clarify in LUDMA that if project B is independent from project A and it's a complete application, that the city should start processing. Now, you'll notice the language in here about the dependency is a project A and project B are phases, and the infrastructure is not complete in project A. That can be a reason why the city does not move forward on project B. So there has been language going back and forth on this concept. So if you have any questions or want to follow up with this, grab Carson or me or Todd Godfrey. And then our land use task force negotiators, which includes city attorneys and planners from around the state, are working through the language that we've received from the PRC. Likewise, on the sidewalk installation time in here, this is another interesting one. There are valid policy points on both sides. And on the development side, they have shared the frustration, which I think is a valid one, that they build the sidewalk, and that sidewalk gets destroyed over the course of the construction, and they have to rebuild the sidewalk that adds to the cost of the property. But they also acknowledge our policy concern that we want sidewalks completed. You want that from a pedestrian safety perspective, and then the expectation for those future home buyers. You don't want the quote-unquote missing teeth model where sidewalks here, and then it's missing 2 houses sidewalk, and that goes on in perpetuity. So the discussion went back and forth was, could there be a separate sidewalk completion assurance bond that would have a pretty narrow time clock associated with it, that would at least give them the opportunity to not build the sidewalk twice. That the sidewalk doesn't have to be built right away, but it can be built, but still in a short period of time. So again, language is going back and forth on that one. Norm.
The short time frame doesn't work because you fall into another recession. We have 200 lots in a subdivision that were unfinished for over 10 years. So who's gonna do that? Are we gonna do it? Are we gonna have to take them on and go make it happen? That's the challenge of it. Safe routes to school. There's all kinds of different problems with that.
Oh, you're spot on. So the idea here, again, this is where we're working on the language. Nothing's been decided. We wanted to make sure people were aware, so you could get back to us if you had concerns. Since they had that sidewalk completion assurance bond, and the background you just described as adequate, then yeah, you would call on the bond and then use the bond to finish those sidewalks. So they would still get done, but they wouldn't necessarily be built at the beginning of the process. So you still have the remedy to do it.
Cam, if we call the bond, we're building the sidewalks and then they get trashed.
Yeah, that's right.
We're right back where we started from. We had the exact same problem in 2007 through 2010, and it took us to like 2013 to fix all those sidewalk problems. It's rather substantial, and where we're going into a recession, this seems the wrong time to be trying to put something like that in place, where we're going to be stuck without actually connected sidewalks.
Well, that's why we're bringing it up, that there's language there's draft language that we received that we were looking at. We gave them feedback last week, so they're going to be rewriting that language. But this is helpful feedback for us. Again, what we've told them is there still needed to be a remedy to get the sidewalks complete. So that would be the assurance bonds, need to be in a timely way, which would be the shot clock, and then there'd be the liability piece of ensuring that the city's not liable if there was an accident in that right of way and a sidewalk hadn't been built in a timely fashion. So those are the 3 pieces that they're going to try to solve. So stay tuned for what that draft would look like. Subdivision technical cleanup. This is one we've initiated, trying to clarify some language from last year's subdivisions bill, really focused particularly on smaller communities that have limited staff. Likewise, in the planning and plan review technical cleanup side, there are some major discrepancies and inconsistencies with definitions. We cannot, for example, require resubmission of a plan review for a minor reason. Minor is undefined. So what does that actually look like? We've got language we've been working on that we have not yet shared with the Property Rights Coalition, but we need to share with them before LPC meets again. So we've got this language. We're going to present it to the code official legislative group on October 4th. If there's anyone in your city that would like to see this language, or would like to participate with us, again, let Carson, Dwight Godfrey, or me know, so we can plug you in, on any of these, policy and technical issues. Any questions about any of these 4 things, or any other points anybody wants to make? Going once, going twice. Okay, now to the TBD slide. So I already mentioned the first 2. Let me hit the third one, because we're gonna ask a quick slide of question on this one. Once upon a time, there was actually a state cap on the amount that a local government could charge for a disproportionate rental fee. That cap went away in statute, because a lot of cities had adopted good landlord programs, which was the incentive to essentially avoid the large disproportionate rental fee. So for example, you'd have a disproportionate rental fee, I'm using wild numbers to illustrate. Disproportionate rental fee, saying these rentals have this impact on public safety or other public services, so we're gonna charge $1,000 disproportionate rental. But if you go through the landlord program and you get certified and you're taking these steps, your fee is gonna get cut to $50. So it's an incentive for landlords to go through that program. That said, we've seen more and more cities start to go away from the good landlord program. So we've had several who brought up the point of, if those programs, the incentive to buy down the fee are going away, does it make sense to restore some sort of state cap or have some sort of parameters on what the disproportionate rental fee would be? So we're asking a slide of question in a moment about how many cities are using these fees, so we can get an idea of what the universe is, and then we'll follow up with those cities. Then the last 2 TBDs are around landscaping requirements. I should put excessive in quotation marks, but landscaping requirements to get a building permit or CFO, and then shot clock to actually issue the CFO. And you can see the questions that we asked at the meeting last week. These were just concepts that were brought up in this space. And the general theme is anything in the land use process space gets pulled back into a question around affordability. As the longer process takes, it hypothetically drives up the cost, therefore the price of housing. So these were some of the ideas, again, that are just coming up in this space. Just want to make you aware of it. If you or someone in your city wants more detail or wants to be involved in any of these conversations, please let us know, because our negotiators, which again include some attorneys and planners and league staff, will be meeting with the Property Rights Coalition again in early October, and we expect some of these TBDs to have a little more meat on the bones by then. I see chat. Yeah, so Ken from North Salt Lake, apartment communities that do not participate in the landlord programs have the impact of the disproportionate fees not to. Right, so if they participate in the good landlord program, then there's the incentive to pay the smaller fee. If you don't have a good landlord program and you're charging the high fees, that's the question that they bring to us. So that leads to the, Carson, is it the last final question of the day?
Should be.
Because your city charges disproportionate impact business license fee on rental housing properties, yes, no, or uncertain. Again, if the answer is yes, that's not a bad thing. We just want to know what the universe is, so we can follow up with cities to get a sense of what those fees are. If you have any sort of offset, like a good landlord program, we just need to get a better understanding of what the universe is on this issue. Leave this open for a second longer. Well, so Ken, you just got called out because your friendly neighbors in Bountiful were wondering why you're asking the question remotely instead of crossing the street. I'll let you decide if you want to answer that. You might have said your friendly neighbors. Okay, looks like that's helpful. So if you said yes, we'll be following up with you again, trying to get to the universe is on that list. All right, Justin, is there anything else you want to add? Okay, here are the key dates. This has been incredibly helpful. LPC and giving us a lot of good feedback on a lot of these moving pieces. We'll next meet on October 16th. The league officers have meetings with Speaker Wilson and Representative Schultz, President Adams, and the governor's staff between now and the next LPC. We'll be talking about several of these topics. The UEOC final meeting is scheduled for the 18th, so we'll be bringing back reports to you. Likely, we may have things you can actually vote on at that point. If there's still a concept form, we'll use Slido to get the direction, because Mayor Ramsey will need to cast votes on October 18th on our behalf on whatever comes before the UEOC. Our last appeal is this. Obviously, we've hit you with a lot of stuff. Part of the idea of building this out was to make it easier for you to initiate conversations with your legislators about the different proposals that are on the table. Please, 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 over the next 3 weeks, make sure you're having that conversation. If we reference this document, this is where I'm going to end up. Legislators had a day-long meeting last week where they were talking about growth. They all received one of these documents about how the legislature has enacted policy over the last few years, and this needs time to bloom. That being said, we know there are lots of other ideas out there, and it's important that you relay the impact of one size fits all to those legislators, and also show how, in the case of modular and some of the other things we talked about today, that we are trying to solve problems to address affordability while still respecting the role of local government. Okay, Mayor Walker, I'll turn it back to you to see if there are any other final comments or after a motion to adjourn. So thank you, everybody, for being here.
And if any of you are interested in a field trip to the modular factory, I'd be happy to see if I can arrange a larger group. So just let us know. Their plan in our city is to build a 5-story apartment complex with the modular units. And so it'll be a big project anyway. Is there any other business?
Whose center was bitten by a moose? We need to know. Question and answer section.
Bitten by a moose?
Yeah, it's in Slido. Question and answer. I have this not from Saratoga Springs, right?
No, but someone carved initials in it.
All right.
Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. We're adjourned.